Hello there and good evening and welcome to my channel. My name is Craig Davis, or the lay preacher James Davis, and welcome to my channel. 2 weeks ago I did a video, a series called Demons Are Real, and the first episode was about Ouija boards. In this video, this episode is going to be about strange entities called black-eyed kids. So this is the second episode of Demons Are Real, and the reason why I am exposing Satan's soldiers right now is because it is October. It is a late October, and Halloween is only just around the corner, unfortunately. Oh dear. Right. Here I have true stories of people who have had that unfortunate event of encountering these strange entities. So, what are they? Who are they? And what are they about? Well, this is what it says, right? This is what it says on the back of this book. Are you ready to explore the frightening and disturbing world of black-eyed kids sightings? Be prepared to delve into true accounts of people all over the world from all walks of life who have encountered black-eyed kids. Experience their fear, confusion, and temporary loss of willpower as they fight to protect themselves from these mysterious predatory children that stalk the darkness. Learn the hallmarks of the stereotypical black-eyed kids encounter, causing a sense of dread before you even see them asking for permission to enter your home or car. Find out what happens when people reject their requests, and experience the dread of those who made the mistake of letting them in. Discover how far back the black-eyed kids encounters really go. Excuse me, I got an itch in my nostril. Right. Discover how far back the black-eyed kids encounters really go, and how widespread they have become in the last 20 years. Find out what it feels like to encounter a black-eyed kid firsthand and be left wondering about their intentions. You will find answers to some of the questions that many people are finding themselves asking. What happens when someone lets a black-eyed kid inside their home? Are there adult black-eyed kids? Do the black-eyed kids have any special powers? Within these pages, you'll be able to reveal the true experiences of many individuals that have come into direct contact with a black-eyed kid. You'll notice recurring themes of fear, confusion, hypnotic powers, and aggressiveness. You'll find out humans aren't the only ones to react to them with terror. You'll learn they show up all over the world, from rural areas to suburbs to busy metropolitan areas with high-rise apartments, or flats as we call them in the UK. You'll also discover their potential victims fall into a specific profile. Any one of us could hear a knock on the door and find a pair of black-eyed kids on our front porch. Be prepared to delve into the world of the black-eyed kids' victims and pray you don't become a victim yourself. Pray to Jesus, pray to God, pray to the blood of the Lamb, because Jesus is the only one who can protect you. I've known about these entities for some time, right? They usually come in pairs, and they usually disguise themselves as children from the ages of 8 to 15, give or thereabout. And the reason why I say disguise themselves as children, because in reality they are not children, they are inhuman spirits, they are demons. Now, before I go any further, if you have your Bibles with you, please turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 5, from verse 6 to verse 9. Okay? No, we'll go to verse 11. So, 1 Peter chapter 5, from verse 6 to verse 11. And I read from the King James Version. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. But the God of grace, who hath called us unto his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, settle you. To him be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Right? God cares for you. This is why humble yourself before him. Pray to him, and he will protect you from the forces of darkness. Remember, we are fighting a spiritual battle between good and evil. Read Ephesians chapter 6 from verse 10 to 22. And verse 8 is also important. Be sober, be vigilant. Right? In this context, being sober doesn't mean to abstain from drugs and alcohol, right? It doesn't mean it in that context. In this context, sober here means to be alert, to be aware, to not be oblivion to Satan's schemes. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, who is Satan, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Remember, people say ignorance is bliss. Wrong. Ignorance is destructive, and it leads to destruction. As God said to his people in the book of Isaiah, I can't remember where in Isaiah it is, but it says somewhere, he says, my people died from a lack of knowledge. So no, ignorance isn't bliss, and ignorance isn't the same as arrogance. I know, I'm so surprised how many people interchange those two words as if they're the same thing. They're not. Arrogance means to be cocky and proud. Ignorance is to have little or no knowledge about something. And there's so many Christians out there who are ignorant because they don't spend time in prayer, and they don't read their Bibles, and they go to church every Sunday pretending to be a Christian, but then throughout the week they live as the heathens do. They live as the world lives. They're hypocrites. Jesus will rebuke lukewarm Christians, because that's what these Christians are. They are lukewarm Christians. And you are seen worse than an atheist. So be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Be aware, be vigilant, be alert, put on the full armour of God, as it says in Ephesians 6. And then in verse 9, whom resist steadfast in the faith, and knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. Yes, the world hates us. Who runs? Why? Because who runs this world? Satan. And who is one of Satan's army? Black-eyed kids. So, let me read a few stories from people who have encountered these horrible entities. Let's start with the introduction. Right? Introduction. Black-eyed kids, often abbreviated to B.E.K.S or B.E.K.S, are a terrifying, mysterious phenomenon encountered by many individuals across the world. While many claim the appearances only started after a specific online post in the 1990s when a journalist shared his terrifying experience, those who have researched the subject know the sightings go back much further than that. While there are many people who enjoy debunking B.E.K.S stories, you can be sure they aren't among those who have encountered an actual B.E.K. Consequently, what makes a B.E.K. encounter? Well, a pair of children between the ages of 8 and 16, although there are some encounters with black-eyed adults too, will typically approach you. You'll immediately notice something unsettling about the children. It could be their odd clothing. Their strange way of speaking, their mature way of expressing themselves, or perhaps their strange haircuts. A strong sense of danger begins to build up as you interact with these seemingly harmless children or kids. The pair usually need access to either your home or your car, and become increasingly insistent if you deny them. Their tone will become demanding and authoritative. As you begin to feel more and more threatened, it seems like an outside force is compelling you to open your door, be it the door of your car or the door of your home. To these strange, demanding, creepy young people, which their not people at all. I've already established this. Not to mention, they seem to be relentless in their demands, which more often than not include the need to contact their mother so she won't be worried. At some point during the encounter, you'll get a very clear look at their faces. What you see will haunt you for the rest of your life. Their eyes are completely black, as what is shown in this picture. They are not black contact lenses or diluted pupils. The pupils, iris, and the whites of their eyes are all black. The effect this sight has on you is beyond disturbing. A sense of terror will envelop you, but at the same time you will likely take all the power you have to refuse them access. One individual eyewitness you will read about in its book described it as a predator-prey type of hypnotic effect, like a frog unable to flee a snake intent on devouring it. Most people, however, are able to refuse the B.E.K.S access to the home or car, but not everyone. One of the saddest B.E.K.S stories comes from a mother who ran into a gas station or petrol station to pay for her gas or petrol, only to come out and discover a strange child in her car with her young son. As she approached the car, she saw the stranger's eyes completely black and glinting heavily in the sunlight. She feared for her son's life as she ran to the car, flung the door open, and pulled him out and away from the inhuman child. Running with her son back into the gas station, they found safety behind the glass door, but looking back to her vehicle, she noticed the black-eyed kid was gone. She questioned her son, and he informed her the boy asked if he could get in the car, so he let him in. A few days later, her son became seriously ill and was rushed to the hospital. He remained hospitalized off and on for several months and then mysteriously recovered. Doctors were never certain about a diagnosis. However, his mother was certain her son's illness was related to the black-eyed child her son let into the car. Another disturbing story, it depicts the unusual power that a black-eyed kid seemed to exert over people. A mother and daughter were cleaning a church, going about their normal routine when there was a knock at the locked door. Upon inspection, a teenage girl stood at the door asking to use the church bathroom. The mother let the young woman in without a second thought. To the mother's horror, she found herself in the church office calling her husband to pick her up, which would effectively leave her daughter in the church alone. A very strict rule the duo had to never be in the church alone for safety reasons. When the mother realised what she was doing, she quickly hung up the phone, ran to find her daughter, and the two waited outside together until her husband came. What kind of mysterious power did the teenage girl possess to almost override a mother's most basic instinct to protect her child. Are you ready to experience some true stories of chilling encounters of black-eyed kids? Then turn on the lights and be prepared to be frightened, because you never know who is lurking around the corner or if they even have eyes. First recorded black-eyed kid encounter. Can you hear him? The guy on a motorbike. But anyway, right. First recorded black-eyed kid encounter. The first publicly shared B.E.K.S encounter occurred in 1996, though it would have probably died away quickly had it not happened to a well-respected journalist from Abilene, Texas. Here's the story that brought B.E.K.S to the world's attention. Local journalist Brian Bethel was in a partially lit parking lot, that's car park by the way, between 9:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. Parked in front of an office next door to a movie theatre. He sat in his car while he finished filling out a check for his a monthly internet service bill, using the light from the neighbouring theatre marquee to see, intending to drop off the payment in the overnight drop slot at the provider's office door as soon as he was finished. As he was engrossed in filled out the information on his check, there was a knock on the driver's side window. Looking up, he saw two young boys standing next to his car. One boy was approximately 9 years old and the other was about 12 years old. The eldest had an olive complexion with dark brown curly hair, while the youngest had ginger-coloured hair with a pale freckled complexion. They both wore hooded pullovers that partially obscured their eyes. Brian didn't roll the window down, but he could hear the elder boy clearly. "We came here to watch the premiere of Mortal Kombat, but we left our money at home. Will you give us a ride home?" He claimed at the time. He knew his fear did not make sense, but it was so strong he couldn't ignore or pass it off. He hesitated, looking through his window at the boys' faces, partially obscured by their hoodies, but they seemed harmless. Not to mention, the request seemed innocent enough, but it was rather strange in the 1990s for two boys to attempt to get a ride with a total stranger. But this didn't explain the fear he felt. Brian glanced up at the theatre marquee and realised Mortal Kombat had already been showing for an hour. He knew something was off immediately. "It won't take long," the older boy said, looking down with his eyes still obscured by his hoodie. "We're just two boys. We won't hurt you. We don't have a gun." The boy's tone was jarring. He sounded like a young boy, but his manner of speaking was odd and had an unnatural rhythm. Thoughts were racing through Brian's mind. Why would those words even come out of the boy's mouth? How did he know Brian was afraid of them? And who in their right mind would be afraid of two boys like this? An almost uncontrollable urge came over Brian to open the passenger door for the boys to get in, but the terror he felt in his gut stopped him. Suddenly the boys looked up and made eye contact with Brian, who would never ever be the same again. For the first time, Brian got a clear look at the eyes, completely jet black without pupils. It was like staring into an abyss of total nothingness. Only darkness. The terror Brian felt flooded his entire being as he muttered some excuse, slamming the car into reverse and tore out of the parking lot like a bat out of hell. He remained unnerved for hours. When he drove by the theatre the next day, he remembered a Mortal Kombat had already been on for an hour when the boys had approached him. They were lying to him about being there to watch a movie. What had been their reason for approaching him? What would have happened if he allowed them into his car? What did they really want? He later posted his story on a private chat room online. From there, he discovered just how many people had encountered these mysterious black-eyed children. It's one thing I have to say, right? Why do these entities have completely black eyes? I tell you why. Because they're soulless. They have no soul. This is why looking into their eyes, staring into the eyes is frightening. Because there's no soul there. It's like looking into an abyss, as I said a few seconds ago. There's more stories. I'm not gonna read them all. Which one do? Right. Here's one story I want to read. To the atheists out there, right? To the atheists out there. Here we are. And this story is called Looking for a B.E.K.S. To all of those who are suspicious whether these creatures are real, to all those who wish to debunk black-eyed kids, then listen to this. And this story is called Looking for a B.E.K.S. Gary didn't believe B.E.K.S were real. He was determined to prove they didn't exist, but ended up proving the opposite, at least to himself. His is a cautionary tale, reminding us of the rumour if you are too occupied with B.E.K.S, you're likely to meet one. Research. Gary had heard about B.E.K.S and started researching them online in his spare time. He just didn't believe they were real. Thinking the eyes were contacts or some medical disease, and the fear people felt was just the power of suggestion. He lived in a large city and figured there had to be a few around. To prove his point, he started putting an ad in his local Craigslist inviting a Beck to meet him at a certain bench a short distance from his apartment building, or flats as we say in the UK. The ad ran for 6 months, but Gary didn't have any takers. Instead, he attracted some weirdos and pranksters, but no real Becks showed up. To talk with him. Gary had to admit he was a bit disappointed. The visit. Satisfied he had at least proven to himself they weren't real, he stopped posting his ad. One night, which would have been the day and time for his weekly Beck invitation, he was at home on his computer researching some new topic when several hours later he heard a knock at his door. He glanced at the time and realised how late it was, and no one ever came knocking at his apartment door or flat door at night. Primal fear. That was when he felt it, a fear like nothing he had ever felt in his life. Gary claims his blood ran ice cold, as he instinctively knew who was at the door. The B.E.K.S he had been trying to make contact with for 6 months had come to see him. Gary said the fear enveloping him was a primal fear, springing from deep within him. It was like he instinctively knew who was at the door, almost as if generations before him had written that fear in his DNA. He had scoffed at people's fear before, but now it was quite a different story. He slowly stood up from his chair and made his way through his dimly lit apartment to the front door. He unlocked it, his heart pounding and his pulse racing. Opening it just wide enough to see through the bright fluorescent lights in the hallway were blinding him. He looked straight ahead, squinting, and then looked down. The black-eyed kids. A boy about 9 years old was standing on his welcome mat. He had medium-length curly hair and a beautiful olive skin tone. As Gary looked into his face, his instincts were confirmed. The boy's eyes were surrounded in darkness. He looked up in the direction of Gary's face. A voice, sounding young, yet mature beyond his mere 9 years, said, "Can I come in?" Gary knew what the boy was going to ask before he asked it. To his horror, Gary realised his hand was moving to open the door wider. He clenched his hand into a fist and held it tightly against his side. He was able to say no, but not without a great deal of effort. The boy replied, "We missed you at the park tonight." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was an evil, threatening smile. It was an evil grin. Gary released his fist and closed the door. He began to grasp for air as he leaned his back against the door for support. Gary realised he had been holding his breath without knowing it. When the boy knocked on the door again, Gary had stepped a few feet away from the door. He was so shaken and disturbed, it was about an hour before he could move completely away from the door and sit down. Yet the boy kept knocking for about the same amount of time. Gary has not seen the boy again, except for in his nightmares. He hasn't researched black-eyed kids anymore either. He learned his lesson. Now, going to another part of the world, in the English county of Staffordshire, England. For those who don't know where Staffordshire is, it is in the West Midlands area of England. Okay, and there's been a lot of black-eyed sightings there in Staffordshire. I forgot to say something in the story I just read about this skeptic Gary, who's not a skeptic anymore, obviously. That is a very unusual story because black-eyed kids usually come in pairs. Very rare do they come to a person's home alone. But in this story, he did. Right. And so anyway, moving forward to Staffordshire, England. In a wooded area called Cannock Chase. So, I'll just read the story. Right. Cannock Chase. Back in the 1980s, a different type of a B.E.K. encounter took place only to repeat itself about 30 years later. It is connected to the murder of 3 little girls in the 1960s. These stories all took place in the same general location over a span of 30 years in Cannock Chase, Staffordshire, England. If you were alive in the 1960s, there's a chance the name Cannock Chase is familiar. 3 young schoolgirls were killed and another sexually assaulted and left for dead over a 2-year period, all by Raymond Morris, also known as the Cannock Chase Monster. Some people believe there is a connection between those murdered, all girls between the ages of 5 and 9 years old, and the young black-eyed kids that made repeated appearances. It was summer when 18-year-old Karen was meeting with some friends near the Cannock Chase forest to, as she put it, to meet and chill. They were having a great time and things remained uneventful right until right before dark. That's when the group heard frantic shouting and screaming. The voice sounded like a terrified child, and Karen sprang to action. She took off running in the direction of the piteous cries, falling over a tree root and injuring her foot. Darkness was falling and it was getting difficult to see, but Karen was determined to help the child at the source of the cries. Despite the painful bloody injury, she kept running along a path that seemed to be taking her right to the horrific screaming. It was dark and Karen could barely see, but she was desperate to help whoever was in need. "Help, Mommy, help!" the child screamed. Karen ran harder, ignoring the pain in her foot. Suddenly ahead of her, she caught the sight of a little girl about 6 years old running away from her. The girl was wearing a white dress and didn't seem to be in any immediate danger. Karen called out to the child, "Are you okay? Were you the one crying for help?" The little girl stopped running and turned to face her. Chills ran down Karen's spine and her blood ran icy cold. The girl's eyes were completely black. Completely. With no irises and no whites around the eyes. She looked in Karen's direction for a moment, straight into her eyes, as if peering into her very soul. Then it disappeared into the forest. The screaming stopped and the forest was eerily quiet. Unable to find her in the darkness, Karen limped back to her friends, who had grown very concerned for her welfare. They insisted she had to go to the local hospital to get her foot attended to. As soon as her injury was stitched up, Karen headed to the local police to file a report. No children were reported missing in the area, but the police still sent out a search team and dogs to investigate. They did not find any sign of a little girl whatsoever. Another encounter. The story was forgotten about until another incident occurred about 30 years later. Another young woman, Anne, was near the same forest when she too heard the terrifying screams of a young girl. A mother herself, she grabbed her daughter and began to run to find the source of the cries. The screams continued, pulling her deeper into the forest. "Mommy, help me! Please, Mommy, help me!" The voice cried desperately. The frantic cries horrified Anne, who was determined to find this child and save her. Anne ran and ran, but it seemed the cries remained just beyond her. Completely out of breath, Anne had to stop, setting her own little one down beside her for just a moment. Suddenly a chill swept over Anne, and even hair on her body seemed to stand on end. She sensed a presence behind her. Anne turned and saw a young girl, about 10 years old. She was wearing a white dress and had her hands over her eyes. Anne described the little girl's behaviour in terms of a small child with her hands over her eyes as a birthday cake is set down in front of her. The child stood there motionless and silent. An uncanny quiet seemed to settle over the forest. Not even the sound of birds or insects could be heard. Puzzled, Anne asked again, "Are you okay, honey? Do you need help?" The little girl slowly put her arms down by her sides and opened her eyes, looking directly at Anne. Her eyes were all black, a darkness so chilling, disconcerting and horrifying that for a moment Anne couldn't pull her own eyes away. Suddenly, feeling as if she were caught in some type of trap, Anne grabbed her daughter by the arm, scooped her up, and began to run in the opposite direction of the little girl. She glanced back at the strange little black-eyed girl. She glanced back, and the strange little black-eyed girl had disappeared. And last but not least, the man, his dog, and the black-eyed kid. There is one more direct encounter with the black-eyed kid of the forest worthy of noting. Charlie always enjoyed walking his dog at night and wasn't at all worried when he heard a rustling sound in the bushes alongside the trail he and his dog were traversing. He assumed it was a small animal and thought nothing of it, and neither did his dog. It continued for about 10 minutes, and then suddenly the sound behind him. It continued for about 10 minutes, and then suddenly the sound was behind him instead of beside him. His dog suddenly strained at the leash, or the lead as we say in UK, pulling him further along the path and barking hysterically. Charlie turned around to see what was behind him, but saw nothing. Suddenly, the dog began pulling him with all its might in the opposite direction. The dog's bark was full of terror, unlike nothing Charlie had ever heard before. Naturally, Charlie turned his head to look at what his faithful dog was trying to pull him away from. Imagine his surprise when he saw a little girl standing in the middle of the path, her arms straight down at her sides, staring right at him. As Charlie's mind was registering at what he was looking at, his dog kept desperately trying to pull him back down the path away from the little girl. Charlie, no doubt, was about to rebuke his dog for being afraid of nothing but a little girl when the moonlight reflected off her eyes. Shocked, Charlie blinked, and when he opened his eyes, she was gone. There was no way humanly possible for her to have disappeared that quickly, nor was it possible for her to walk away without making a sound. Charlie's dog still wanted to go home, and at that moment, so did Charlie. This is the last story in Cannon Forest, and it's about a drone that captures a child, so-called child, at the edge of the dense forest in Cannon Chase. This story of the Cannon Chase B.E.K. is not complete without discussing two indirect sightings. One was by a group of paranormal investigators who were seeking ghost footage in the forest. They had about 6 hours of footage to process, and in the middle of it, they discovered something quite interesting. A young girl dressed in a white dress standing several yards away from the camera. This could be written off as a child out playing in the woods, but this girl seemed to have her own most unnatural light source in the darkness. Finally, there was another possible sighting made by a quadcopter drone flying near the edge of the forest. In the footage, you can see a young girl in a white dress standing at the very edge of the tree line. As the copter drone nears, she turns her body away So she turns her body away from it so her face cannot be seen. Her appearance is mysterious to say the least, as was her reaction to the quadcopter drone. Questions left unanswered. All these sightings took place in the same general area, associated with a brutal sexual assault and murder of young girls. How uncanny is it that in each of these stories, the black-eyed kid was a young girl around the age of the victims? Also, unlike the majority of B.E.K.S sightings, these involved only one child rather than a pair, as it was in the story with a skeptic guy, Gary, yeah? Likewise, instead of seeking out people, the B.E.K draws people to her with horrific screams and cries, while in the case of the man walking his dog, she is stalking him. Is she a black-eyed kid, or is she something else? Now, so far, every story that I have read, people, or victims as I should say, who have encountered these horrible things, right? They have managed to deny their requests. But what happens if an encounter decides to let them into the home? Let's see what happens. Let's read what happens. Shall we? And this one is called Our Parents Are Coming. Let's see how many pages there are. And then I think, there's one more story I want to read after this, and then I think I'll wrap it up, okay? Right. This story is called Our Parents Are Coming. And we will find out what happens when a homeowner, instead of resisting these demonic entities, instead allows them into their home. One of the most frightening black-eyed kid stories to date involves a couple who allowed a pair of black-eyed kids into their home, causing an aftermath of their encounter. Many people wonder what would happen if B.E.K.S entered their home. Paul and Brenda Wilson found out firsthand, and they've lived to regret it. Paul and Brenda lived in a stereotypical small town off the rural dirt road deep in the country up north. Their home was isolated, and without streetlights, the darkness was almost overwhelming. They never felt afraid there, however, until one particular winter night. It had been snowing for several hours, and Brenda wasn't exactly surprised when someone banged on her door at 2 o'clock in the morning. As she peeked out the bedroom window, she assumed someone's car had broken down, and their home had been the first sign of life. This happened often enough for it not to surprise them when someone knocked on their door at an unusual hour. As she peered out from behind the curtains, Brenda noticed The motion detector lights were on, and she could clearly see a pair of footprints coming from the dirt road. The snow on the road showed no indication of car tracks, though, and she couldn't see a car stopped on the road. She could, however, make out two small figures standing at the front door. Everything was quiet and silent as the snow slowly fell outside, when the banging continued as Brenda woke up and her husband Paul. Paul dressed and answered the door with Brenda standing behind him. On Paul and Brenda's front porch stood two young children, a boy and a girl, both about 8 years old. Brenda noticed they were not dressed for winter weather, and normally her first instinct would have been to rush the little ones inside to warm up, but she felt a strong hesitation. Something was just not right about the children. The haircuts were strange and out of fashion. The boy was some sort of outdated bowl cut, and the girl with long hair and short, blunt bangs. Their clothes, too, seemed unfashionable for the time, and they couldn't make eye contact with Paul or Brenda. Nonetheless, that wasn't enough for the couple to deny a pair of children into their home on such an icy cold night. Paul invited them into the house, while Brenda rushed into the kitchen to make some hot cocoa for them. As she heated the water, she could hear Paul asking the children about the parents. "Our parents will be here soon," said the girl in an almost sing-song voice. It was unnatural and jarring, but Brenda couldn't quite pin down why. "What happened? Did the car break down?" Paul continued. "Our parents will be here soon," she replied, as she found her brother sat down on the sofa, Paul sitting across from them in his favourite chair. "Was there an accident?" Again. "Our parents will be here soon," she repeated. Brenda was terribly unnerved by their appearance, behaviour, strange answers, and something else she couldn't quite identify as was Paul. They weren't the only ones, though. As she busily prepared the hot cocoa, she realised 3 of the family cats were nowhere to be seen, which was quite odd. They usually had to chase their rather friendly cats away from the guests. Only one cat was present. His or her name was Percival. I don't know, but anyway, that's important, right? Who cares about the cat's name, innit? Her cat or their cat, whatever, right? I'll just call her the cat, right? The cat stood in the doorway leading to the living room where the children sat. His dark fur was raised along his spine, and his tail pointed downwards and poofed out to twice its normal size. He hissed at the children and began to swiftly walk sideways further back into the kitchen until he was out of their line of sight. Brenda walked around him, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa into the living room, puzzled by the cat's odd behaviour. She was taken aback when she noticed Paul was sitting, leaning forward with his head in his hands. His face was contorted and in terrible pain. She quickly set the mugs down on the coffee table in front of the children and kneeled down by Paul. "I'm dizzy, that's all," he said to Brenda. As she turned to the children, they finally made eye contact. Their eyes were abnormal, just as the other sightings of black-eyed kids. The girl stood up, pulling her brother up with him. "We need to use the bathroom," she stated in the same sing-song voice. Brenda, still kneeling by Paul, pointed through the kitchen to the bathroom in the hallway. As they walked away, she looked into Paul's face. She could tell that he too had seen their eyes. As she began to say something, something to him, his nose began to bleed profusely, though he never had a single nosebleed in his life. Brenda rushed into the kitchen to grab some tissues when the power in the house went out. Thrust into extreme darkness, the kind of darkness that only people who live in the country are familiar with, Brenda felt around on the kitchen counter for the tissue box, but sensed movement and realised the children were standing in the doorway in the kitchen. For an instant, headlights from the car pulling into their drive silhouetted them. She saw their shapes standing side by side, holding hands and facing her. Unspeakable terror gripped her, and she felt immediate danger and froze. "Our parents are here," stated the girl, as she and her brother walked past Brenda into the living room and out of the front door, leaving it gaping open. A cold breeze blew in as Brenda found her way to Paul, and together they rushed to the front window. They saw the children, illuminated by car lights from a sedan idling in the snow-covered driveway. Standing at the front of the car were two very tall men dressed in dark suits. As the children approached the men, they opened the back doors of the car. Brenda and Paul walked as the children Brendan and Paul watched as the children and then two men got into the dark sedan and drove away into the dark, snowy night. The aftermath. It would be 30 minutes before the power came back on at the house, just as mysteriously as it had shut off. They never found a reason for the outage. Over the next few months, 3 of the cats went missing. The cat, who had hissed at the children, was found dead in a puddle of bloody vomit on the kitchen floor. Pardon me. The vet's only explanation was he had died because of a hemorrhage, though he never showed any signs of illness before the children's visit. Paul developed regular intense nosebleeds. The only cause his doctor could find was dry sinuses. Brenda too developed nosebleeds, and both suffered dizzy spells for months. Paul was also diagnosed with very aggressive skin cancer, despite having never spent much time in the sun or in a tanning booth. Fortunately, the symptoms eventually went away and Paul was able to recover from his skin cancer. To this day, Brenda is certain everything that happened, the cats, the nosebleeds, the dizziness, the skin cancer, was all due to the mistake of letting a pair of black-eyed kids into their home. And that's it. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I've read enough now. To my brothers and sisters in Christ, look, if you're born again Christian, right? If you believe that the Bible is God's holy words, if you believe and have faith that Jesus Christ died on the cross at Calvary 2,000 years ago for your sins, it's very, very unlikely that you will encounter a black-eyed kid. I'm not saying you won't, but I'm saying if you're born again Christian, these evil entities know this, so they know Christ is all powerful. They know that they were defeated when Jesus went to that cross. So it's very unlikely. But if they do come, pray. Remember, in 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, he that lives in you is greater than he that is in the world. Who is the he in the world? The god of this age, Satan. He is a defeated foe. Yes, these stories are frightening, but did you notice every encounter that these things went to terrorize people? Was any story mentioned where the victims were Christians? No. So that's what I'm saying. If you're born again Christian, it's unlikely that you will encounter these things. I'm not saying it won't happen, I'm saying it's unlikely. But to non-Christians out there, if you encounter any of these things, then I'm sorry, but I cannot help you. The only advice I can do, the only advice I can give is turn to Jesus, because he's the only one who can save you. Anyway, thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Please don't hesitate to subscribe if you haven't already. Please don't hesitate to hit that like button. Please don't hesitate to comment, and please don't hesitate to share this video. And if any of you out there who have encountered these ugly things, then please don't hesitate to leave your thoughts and to leave your stories in the comment section below. Thank you all, and God bless you all in Jesus' precious name. Amen.